I entitled this Co-Creating Pathways for Sustainable and Equitable Futures, just because I think that encapsulates some of what I'm going to talk a little bit about. Um, just to kind of share a bit more about myself, I am a settler woman of primarily Scottish ancestry, but also English and Irish. I am a new mom, which I'm really enjoying despite it being very challenging. Um, I'm a partner and an auntie in a few different contexts. I'm also trained as a registered dietitian here in Ontario and have a background in health and as a health provider. And then I also just recently completed a postdoctoral fellowship here at McMaster University in Indigenous Studies and Anthropology, working with Dr. Don Martin Hill and Dr. Adrian Xavier. And so I'm going to speak a little bit to some of that work. I also wanted to just situate myself on the lands that I'm living on and speaking from today. It's lands cared for by the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. And in this moment, I just want to acknowledge and also take up my responsibility to respect and honor the agreements in place, including the District 1 Spoon Wampum Agreement and the 2 And you can see this is a photo of the two-row shared by uh, Norma Jacobs and Jock Hill in this image, although it's zoomed in so you can't see them. But I think I've got some other photos of them further on. Um, a few key themes that I think this work speaks to um, that you'll kind of hear indirectly about. So, one being ethical community engagement and what that might look like, I hope, as well as traditional ecological knowledge education and collaborations, as well as supporting the next generations. So, before I talk about some of the specific work that I'm involved in, I just wanted to take a few slides to talk a little bit about the way that I step into this work and also hopefully share a little bit more about who I am in that. Um, and so I think something that a lot of people hear um, is the value of strong relationships. And I think that's really important in any community-based work. But I also think that sometimes we throw around words like relationships, and we're not always talking about the same thing. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And yeah, just point out that sometimes there are differences in even how we're coming to the table. Um, I had the privilege of being part of a tech summit at Six Nations here a couple of years ago, and Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer had shared there, and one of the images she shared was this one here. And for me, it really, I think, helped articulate um, further this idea of are we thinking of relationships in the same way, and how that's not just human to human relationships, but also all of the other living and non-living um, um, beings that exist. And so I think this just goes to show that if we're stepping into even the way that we think about relationships differently, um, we're already a little bit kind of behind or are not aligned in being able to do good work together. And so I think one of the frameworks that's useful in thinking about how we step into relationships in a good way is ethical space, which Willie Ermine has spoken about. And this is where relationships are nurtured on a variety of levels. It's where we view all knowledge as equal. And it's not unless we're entering into that space that we can really engage in what co-creation truly means. Um, It's a way of examining the diversity and positioning of Indigenous peoples and Western society, and enables us to really take control and not be used within the colonial systems that exist and that we live in. And thinking of universities, these institutions that we are part of sometimes. And so it really enables us to come to, I think, the space differently in terms of really coming as who we are and as human beings. Another framework that has been really important in some of the work that I'm going to share today is the Truro Wampum. So I do work with Six Nations of the Grand River and some folks there. And so I just want to acknowledge this. Um, and my understanding of this is, in the grand scheme, very limited. So I again want to acknowledge that, but just to share that part of my understanding is that it's the Haudenosaunee canoe and the Dutch or the European ship really traveling side by side on the river of life. Um, and Gaihoiko, or Norma Jacobs, talks more about this in her book Oda Gahodes, which refers to the sacred meeting space, and really, I think, describes some of the answer to the question of how we might be able to nurture this sacred space. In her book, she says, knocking at the door of another with a good intention to be respectful and caring, but doing this while not interfering with others' ways of knowing and being. Another framework that I've used over the last few years is the 5 R's, and I'm sure many people are familiar with this. Um, Refers to relationships, reciprocity, relevance, responsibility, and respect. And I added here a few questions that um, I think come to mind for me as I reflect on what these words might look like in practice. So one being, how can I support healing overall? Um, what do you need? How can I support you? What are our or my responsibilities, which might be within our treaties, agreements, natural laws? Um, and what does it mean to be in relationship together, which I had referred to earlier. And so ultimately, doing this work in a good way, I think, really starts from within ourselves, which leads to meaningful relationships where you truly matter to me. Um, and within that, I think it asks us to consider our own healing on our walk to support collective healing. I use the word healing here, but I think a lot of other words might fit and work. Um, and for me, I think this means that it starts at the spiritual, where we really work to have a good heart and mind. And so, just before oops, sorry, my screen is being funny. There we go. Um, Before I share more about the Oneganos project, I wanted to share another quote from Norma. She says, our relationship with all things should be sacred. Each morning, we need to give acknowledgement and thanksgiving as it is daylight again and we all have life. At nighttime, we honor the day for our experience and for the people who had conversations for and for the people we had conversations with, when we laughed, shared stories, and came to a better understanding of who we are in this relationship with all things. We are always giving thanks and honoring those who have come into our lives while trying to strengthen and enhance these relations by being who we are on these waters. And so, um, that brings me to talk about the Oneganos Research Project and team. So here are some of the team members that I've had the privilege of working with over the last couple of years. I'm currently on a maternity leave, so I haven't been able to see people as much as usual. But yeah, these are some of the amazing folks. Um, I'm going to refer to a lot of different parts of this work over the last few years, and just want to acknowledge that none of this work is my own. This is really work that's led by Dr. Martin Hill and, supported by a lot of leadership and wisdom and many other hands. And I'll refer to some of these people as I go through. Um, so as I said, this work is with Six Nations of the Grand River. And just for those who aren't familiar, um, Six Nations is a Haudenosaunee community, and it's considered the largest population reserve in Canada. And it's home to six Haudenosaunee nations. I have here in the picture the Haldeman Tract, and you can see in the gold or yellow color the current reserve land, which is less than 5% of the original tract. Um, so land back. Um, so the main objective of Oneganos is to develop educational and wellness tools, as well as educational pathways, particularly for Indigenous youth. And over the years, there's been a lot of different teams and aspects to this work, including a tech stream, those who are working on ecosystem health, water sensor systems, and data synthesis. So we've worked with folks in the engineering department here at McMaster and biologists for the ecosystem health. There's also an IK training piece, youth mental wellness, and water governance. And so I'm just going to share some of the findings from early on in this work. So this work really started like 8 years ago. So over that time period, there's been lots of different projects that have been part of this. But one of the early projects was focused on a community health survey. And part of the motivation for this was not to kind of really share a story that community didn't already know. I think a lot of what I'm going to share in these couple of slides, community members were already familiar with, but I think it verified some of that, and then was also able to be used to support further funding acquisition, as well as um, kind of some of the legal pieces with the water governance team. I think it supported that work as well. And so this health piece was with at the time Six Nations Health Services and the Birthing Center, and they really worked together with the PhD students and researchers to develop the research questions and influence really what was included in that survey. And so it took a bit of time to decide on that. But one thing that hadn't been done up to that point was to really ask questions about water and water quality and water security. And so that was a big piece. Based on the community surveys, those reporting water anxiety were 10 times more likely to rely on bottled water and experience tap water contamination. So there was some water quality monitoring in homes that was done as part of this. There's also more water concerns that were reported by women and youth. It's really been impacting women and youth in the community. Looking at the HY scale, which stands for Household Water Insecurity Experiences, which is a global scale that's used for water security monitoring. It's usually 12-item scale, and we modified this to fit for Six Nations. 58%, which you can see here in the red, of the 66 households reported some form of water insecurity. We also noted that gastroenteritis, which is symptoms of stomach upset, was significantly correlated with households treating their water with bleach or chlorine, which supports some of the work that our engineering colleagues have been involved with chlorine water sensors. So the director at the time of health services, who's not the current director, but who continues to do some really important work, um, had supported a long-term community health survey. And this was led by, at the time, the community epidemiologist. She's now in a different role as well. But some of this work, I think, supported conversations for ongoing monitoring and a longitudinal health survey that the Department of Wellbeing really owns and leads. And I don't know what the current updates on that are, but the last time I had chatted with folks, this was ongoing. They were getting ready to launch this. I think now it has been launched, but anyway, I'm keen to follow up with some folks and see where this is. And so, obviously there's a big connection between health and water. Um, some other work, as I mentioned, there is some work done with birthing center, in particular the midwives, and as part of Afroza Saltina's PhD project, they interviewed some of the women at the birthing center and identified a few themes in terms of their experiences with water insecurity. So they noted a difficulty managing different conditions like diabetes, dehydration, eczema. There's obviously a lot of mental and emotional capacity that went into managing those conditions, but also the worry that's involved in trying to prevent running out of water, especially when you're caring for kids, um, and just the energy that's put into accessing safe drinking water. This also disrupts ceremonies and access to traditional medicines, and noting here that a lot of the women medicines are connected to water. And so, in response to some of this data and also some inequity that's been had been happening where Nestle, which was then bought by Blue Triton, was removing 3.6 million liters of water per day. And then community members were buying back bottled water that was um, basically from the aquifer that belonged to community. And so the governance team, led by Makasha Looking Horse, worked with Dr. Beverly Jacobs and the Grandmothers Council. And on September 14th of 2021, they hand delivered a cease and desist order for this illegal water extraction. And they won. And so actually to this day, that aquifer, they have left. They are no longer there. So I think this work really speaks to the power of community, and yeah, I think is such a strong example of resurgence. So in terms of knowledge translation and thinking about ways to share some of the work that Oneguinness has been part of over the last few years. One of the methods that we used was digital stories. And there's several of these that you can check out on the Oneguinness YouTube channel. And this is actually from our website. And I think digital stories were chosen because they really felt more accessible to community members and was a way of using a tool that I think resonated with people while also kind of bringing together traditional methodologies with modern technologies. So we've got a couple of examples of that here. So another tool that we've used is Terra Stories. You can check out their website. And we use this because it enabled mapping where you could link collaborative data, including oral narratives, dam data, water health monitoring, where medicines are, place names, and a lot of other information, and link that to the map and make this accessible to community members. The aim was to connect data, land, and water in a holistic database accessible to community members. And so this project really established data sovereignty that was guided by community. And it has been a living archive nested in school. So the plan was really to engage in terms of um, kids' education and beyond. There's also been a lot of other community collaboration, including partnerships with the Department for the Environment and Wellbeing. I'll make a bit of a plug for the annual Water Festival here in a bit. There's partnerships with Six Nations Polytechnic, and there's also been more and more of a focus to follow the cycle of ceremonies. So, I wanted to incorporate a couple of reflections, not to have a discussion currently, but even just in your own reflection as you listen to this. Um, and some of these I had included as part of a talk that Donna and I did for some health and sustainability folks. But I thought that these might be relevant and hopefully useful to you. So the first reflection is to consider places, waters, and lands that hold significance in your life. Why are these important to you? And what relationships exist as part of these places? And what might be some tools that you do use or you could use to help guide you in this? So, for example, terror stories might be a tool um, that you could use in supporting this reflection. So, um, as I mentioned, as part of Terror Stories, Oral Histories was part of this. And Kayliana Smoke, as well as Emily Anson, worked really closely with Norma Jacobs and clan mother Mary Sandy to hear um, from them. And um, I'm going to share some of the work that they have done here. This really stemmed from a need to include the deep history of the land and water and to create a holistic approach to history and community health. And also to make sure that this knowledge can be shared across 7 generations. And so I'm going to share a really brief clip. This is a longer clip, but let me see if it'll let me play it. I'll just share maybe the first few um, minutes. Now, I feel like it didn't take you to the YouTube. Kendall, can you see the YouTube or is it still showing my PowerPoint?
It's still your PowerPoint.
Okay, I might have to stop share and then reshare. Hmm. Maybe I'll just share. Okay, how about now?
There we go.
Awesome. Okay, and volume you can hear.
Um,
It's a little low.
Is that better?
I can't hear it.
Okay.
I think there's a
I,
setting in Zoom
I can hear
where,
it cutting out a little bit, but it's so like low.
yeah,
All right. Let me see. Hmm. I'm wondering if my headphones are part of the issue. We go to audio.
you might be able to share computer audio. I think the button is It's somewhere, I know it.
Would it be in share settings?
Maybe.
Mm, not seeing anything there.
It might be under more on the right-hand side, and then there's a bunch of stuff settings under that.
Mm, yes. Okay, so share computer sound. I can do mono or stereo. I don't know what that means. I'm gonna do the
Do stereo for that one.
okay. Okay. Um,
The stories of Norma
can you hear that
Jacobs,
now?
knowledge
Yeah, we're
keeper
good.
and storyteller. Jacobs, knowledge keeper and storyteller.
Norma recounted to us her experience of visiting the places where the great peacemaker visited along his journey to unite all the nations of the Haudenosaunee.
Recording Norma's stories is a way of creating a living archive, something that can help preserve oral histories and knowledge for future generations.
While we were there in Tyendinaika, and we were on that road, and we went, there was a place there, a field, and it had all of these pine trees, like new growths coming up. And they told us that that's where the peacemaker left from, was by the river, and there's all these shrubs and some trees that were there. And they said, we know this is the place because the ripples still happen there, and that place never freezes over on the river. So when you go there, and you can see where the ripples, like somebody's paddling into the river, it's still there. You can still see the ripples. And we did, and even like for the indentation for where they pushed the canoe into the water, it's still there. That's why they call it Tyendinaika, because it has a split in the river. So, but the where the river splits, that's the one that I know from Jake Thomas. He talks about that, and he talks about that's where that area was where the peacemaker was for a while. So he used to go hunting there and probably fishing and all of that, because he's that place that I'm describing is not too far from that hill where we went the first time. It was a really powerful place. And anyways, when they crossed the river, because we're close to Kingston, and the one time we took the ferry across to the island there. So we stayed there, and then we journeyed on, and I don't know how we got into the States. Oh, must have crossed the bridge there. But this other time, we went across into the
I'll stop it there. Although there's lots more, and yeah, I recommend checking out more from this. So this is from the Oneganos YouTube channel. You can find the rest of this as well as a lot of the digital stories and other information that's been part of this work. Okay, I'm going to go back and reshare the PowerPoint. Okay. And so Norma's been part of this work in a variety of ways over the last few years, and has been involved in a partnership with Canadian Geographic. And you can read part of that on beingagami.org. It's called She Who Holds the Canoe, a ceremonial pilgrimage along the Peacemakers Trail. And so they've got an article up, and they've done also a video recorded piece. And then there's also this really cool floor map that Vinagami's been part of and Canadian Geographic's been part of, um, where they have augmented reality. And so you can go similar to Terror Stories in that like you can click on specific areas, and then in AR, the story will come up that they've recorded. And so Norma's part of that, as well as Cayuga Sub Chief and Faith Keeper Jock Hill. And so he also has work that he's done with Canadian Geographic as part of Oneganos. And specifically, he talks about the wampum belts. Another tool that we've been part of over the last few years is a virtual reality that starts with the Haudenosaunee creation story, and then journeys. You can journey by canoe to learn more about Haudenosaunee culture and values. Um, I'll share a brief clip of this, but I'll kind of forewarn you if you're someone who kind of gets dizzy looking at VR, if you're not, especially if you're not the one who's in it, like a recorded VR, then um, maybe look away for a couple minutes. I just don't want to make anyone feel dizzy, but I also would love to share this with you. Um, I've got this over here. Yeah. Okay. Um, so this just shows kind of the intro area. This is still being edited, and this was an update that was provided a couple years ago now. So there's been some changes made, but this gives you a sense of some of this work. And so this is you can choose both English and Mohawk. And so here's the English version, but you can hear Mohawk in the background.
A long time ago, our people lived in Sky World. We call them Sky People, and Sky World was a place of everlasting life. In Sky World stood a shining celestial tree that resembled a wild cherry. This is the tree of life. Sky Woman lived in this place. Her name was Ojit Zizo, which means mature flower. Her uncle was Rade Zerunjes, Sky Chief. He is the overseer of the heavens. One day he asked Sky Woman to go get water. He asked her to make 3 trips. He told her not to stop and not to speak to anyone. On her 3rd trip, she met a lacrosse player, and he asked her if she would give him a drink. The Sky Chief learned that she disobeyed him. He was upset with the lacrosse player and banished him from Sky World. But he forgave Sky Woman. Sky Woman had a craving for a root, and she asked Sky Chief to dig some of the roots up for her. He dug a hole at the base of the tree of life, which caused it to be uprooted. Sky Woman was curious and looked into the hole, and when she did, she fell into the hole. As she fell, she grabbed strawberries. As she was falling, the lacrosse player came to break her fall. After leaving Skyworld, he transformed into a meteor. He picked her up and carried her down to the Earth's upper atmosphere. all water, the original life giver.
Okay, I'll stop it here, but that gives you a sense of kind of the first part of the VR. And then um, yeah, I encourage you to take a look. That's there's a link off of the Oneganos website, which is oneganos.com. Okay, so in terms of the VR, we have worked previously with Mohawk College to create some of what you just saw. Um, One thing that was shared from this work is part of an article that they had put out. So the lesson in the Haudenosaunee creation story is that water is the primary element of the planet Earth. According to Haudenosaunee teachings, water is sacred on Earth, although its contemporary treatment would suggest otherwise. Um, and oh, sorry. Um, yeah, just talks a little bit about the partnership with the virtual reality team at the XR Innovation Studio there. And so, as I said, this work has kind of shifted over the last little while, and um, my hope is that it'll get picked up as more funding gets acquired. Because one of the challenges I think with when you're creating some of the tools like this, it does require funds. And one of the challenges with particularly research funds is there's usually time constraints on them, or there's particular outputs that they're looking for. Um, yeah, so I hope to see this work continue in the future. All right, another just reflection question for you as I move into some of the kind of information around the tech summit that Oneganos is part of. So, how might you envision traditional ecological knowledge reshaping health and food systems or other systems? So in particular, I want to talk about food systems because this is some of the work that I've been involved in, and Oneganos has been part of this in that they're partnering with some folks at McMaster to think a bit more about sustainable food systems and cultivated meat, but in particular, what might be climate adaptive approaches that are valuable to community members. Um, so this idea, I'm going to talk really broadly about this idea for a moment, um, in part to highlight, I think, some of the limitations of this work, but um, the um, the food sector is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, and so often becomes a focus when we talk about sustainability. And so sustainable food systems become a focus of that. Um, some of the questions I think are valuable to ask are what are public perceptions of sustainable diets? And how do these conversations benefit, or who do these conversations benefit, and who might be excluded from them at this point? FAO defines sustainable food systems as ensuring food security and nutrition for all in such a way that the economic, social, and environmental basis to generate food security and nutrition of future generations are not compromised. And so to date, Indigenous perspectives on sustainable food systems, kind of broadly speaking, and food technologies that are linked to them are lacking. And so some of the things that come to mind for me as potentially problematic are colonial veganism. So a focus on animal liberation without recognizing the impacts of colonization, and sustainable diet discourse being dominated by plant-based options, which I think, plant-based options have value, but I think that, there needs to be broader conversations had. I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Angela Mashford Pringle at the University of Toronto and some colleagues doing this scoping review. And we really looked at the impacts of colonization on Indigenous food systems. And through thematic analysis, identified that this was really a theme within the work. And then that climate change, capitalism, legal changes, and socio-cultural changes were sub-themes to that. One of the things that we conclude in this paper is that efforts to reconnect Indigenous knowledge and value systems with future food systems are essential for planetary health and sustainable development. I just really want to quickly mention this work on Shoniosto that I've just had the pleasure of really just kind of sitting back and as an external member, getting to be part of some of the conversations. So recognizing that this work is led by others at Six Nations and McMaster. But I wanted to mention it because I think this work has done such a beautiful job at thinking about topics like Indigenous food sovereignty and um, sustainable food systems. So this work thought about defining Haudenosaunee foods with community, and Kendall has been part of this work and leading some of that. Um, there's been a focus on developing a community food strategy, building partnerships between programs and food vendors, and sharing knowledge. Another project that I've had the pleasure of supporting is this fish guide work. And so one of the asks was to create really a science textbook for the schools that would be in the six Haudenosaunee languages. And as a starting point, we thought a fish guide might be kind of a good test of that work and kind of help jumpstart it. The kind of brief poster, part of a poster that you see on the side here, was kind of a very early edition that was part of one of the water festivals a couple of years ago, but it has been since revised through work with language speakers. And so this fish guide has the goal has been to involve information from the biologists who've been engaged with Oneganos, as well as language speakers, knowledge holders, and health professionals. So bringing everyone together to identify what's kind of the most valuable pieces to put forward and to create ultimately this fish guide. So as part of that work, folks who are part of the lab of Mark Servos at University of Waterloo. Mark is a partner with Oneganos, and his team conducted the Mackenzie Creek Subwatershed Project. And so they worked to conduct a fish census and determine the feasibility of using environmental DNA to monitor biodiversity. And then they also looked at some water quality in relation to this. So they identified 39 different fish species, over 14 sites, and noted that water quality degrades moving downstream. And so what this means is that dams are limiting fish movement and contributing to degraded water quality. And fish communities shift from cold water species to warm water species downstream. And so that might speak to, again, the health of the river downstream that's closer to Six Nations. The lab of Dr. Karen Kidd at McMaster. Karen's been part of the Oneganos work over the last few years. Her team looked at contaminants in fish and turtles. And so again, this work in terms of the health implications of it have been valuable in our conversations with the fish guide. Um, Industries, municipal wastewater treatment plants, and agriculture can contaminate rivers with metals, pesticides, and other chemicals. And community members wanted to understand how these might be impacting fish and turtles at Six Nations. And so they worked with their team and fishermen to collect smallmouth bass and turtles to do their analysis. Um, Mercury is commonly found in fish around the province everywhere. And one of the things that they noted that I think gets echoed in general is that the size of fish matters. So larger fish have more mercury because they're eating the smaller guys. Eating smaller fish reduces your mercury exposure. So in terms of a recommendation, it may be better to be eating smaller fish to limit that. And you can safely eat either, but kind of adapting how many you're having based on the size of the fish were some of the recommendations that they had. In terms of mercury and snapping turtles, they created this table that shows you levels in different regions. So good news is that the contaminants are lower at Six Nations. Um, Pesticides were also very low. However, there are regions that have higher content. So in particular, around the Bay of Quinte area, the Belleville area, which I understand can be a popular fishing spot, even for folks at Six Nations. Um, there's higher levels in that region. So this information being valuable to share with those who are fishing and hunting. Someone else who is doing work as part of Onegnos was Tariq Dean out of one of the labs at McMaster. And in his PhD work, he looked at some modeling in terms of climate impacts at Six. And so between 1951 and 2013, the weather became warmer and wetter with increases in extreme heat and precipitation events, which has implications on agricultural practices. I'm not going to try and attempt to speak to some of the figures on this page, but you can find this paper on the Onegnos website and some more details in terms of that, if that interests you. But one of the pieces I really wanted to emphasize here is the implications for food. So one of the pieces they highlight was how assess how changes in seasonal temperature and precipitation patterns, as well as duration of extreme high temperature events, may affect agricultural yields and economic profitability, and whether alternative climate resilient crops and agricultural practices need to be considered. And so this was information that was shared. And some of the implications of it is in conversations for community is thinking about whether there's adaptations in terms of earlier growing seasons, variability in crop yields and types of crops that can grow well, and length of growing seasons and therefore harvesting times. Okay, so before I finish up talking about some of the various parts of Onegnos, I wanted to summarize some of the pieces from this report. So I mentioned early on that there was a tech summit at Six Nations a couple of years ago. So this happened in March of 2024. And I want to acknowledge the leadership of Makasha Looking Horse in this. She really worked to plan this, and Onegnos was supporting some of this work. And so I just wanted to share a summary of what that day was about, because I think the outputs of this day continue to have value in terms of what Onegnos is continuing to do and and have value otherwise as well. So one of the first pieces for the day was a knowledge holders panel. And Leroy Hill was part of that, along with a few others, which I'll mention here in a moment. Here, one of the pieces we say is the knowledge holder panel at the Tech Summit was designed as a space where Haudenosaunee thought on the natural world could serve as a connection point for academics, local communities, and knowledge holders. So present at this summit were community members and leaders, knowledge holders, as well as researchers, some folks from McMaster, youth, and there were also some conservation folks represented and nonprofits. So as each knowledge holder spoke, the profound ways that language matters for discussing Haudenosaunee teachings, governance, generational ties, the harms of colonization, and the gifts of connection and healing emerged through their stories. One of the things that Gaihoeko shared was one of our greatest gifts is the ability to remember. Barb Garlow was also there, as well as Thomas Porter. He shared, Mother Earth is lonely and we need to respond to that. Recognize her, thank her. It takes a spiritual response. There was a panel on ethical engagement with tech. This panel really urged Western conservation organizations, so keeping in mind that they were represented there, urging them to begin implementing strategies of engagement and communication with Indigenous peoples to learn and unlearn, and ultimately adopt their techniques to incorporate tech and IK, and to do this in an ethical way. There are a couple of, so you could see Jerome Marty and Bev Jacobs, David Arquette, and Dawn were the panelists for this. And Dr. Jerome Marty talked about some of his work with the International Association of Great Lakes Research, and how leaders from historically white communities and organizations can support the development and success of Indigenous value systems. In terms of youth recommendations, so another really important part of this day was a specific panel and side workshop that was available to youth at Six Nations as well as students at McMaster. And there were some key themes that came out of that. In particular, the Indigenous youth emphasized the need for land restoration, having access to land and water with respect for inherent rights. And there was a collective desire to see conservation groups engage more meaningfully with Indigenous communities and practice culturally safe engagement. And they provided a list of curriculum and courses that they would really like to have access to. So you can see in the green box some of what those pieces are. So learning about food forests, basket making, traditional medicines, plant identification, gardening, and maybe survival courses. They also emphasized the importance of access to Indigenous elders and knowledge holders, and the opportunity to learn from them. And so thinking about that in terms of what transformations would be helpful within educational systems and curriculum development. And so currently, Oneinos is working with Six Nations Polytechnic to develop Haudenosaunee Research Center Institute. They're focusing currently on curriculum development. That center is Indigenous science and tech, as well as land-based learning, and hopefully new tech center that gets funded. And currently they're working to create a course that's between SNP and McMaster, where students can get credit, a university credit, um, while engaging in some of these topics. And so I just want to make a quick plug for the Six Nations Water Festival. This started a couple of years ago. Um, and Onegnos continues to be one of the organizers for this, along with many other partners. Um, and the goal has initially was to really focus on advocacy for regular water testing through health services. And it's really expanded from that. So if you're available to go, it's July 21st this year at Chiefswood Park. Okay, so just as I wrap things up from this work, Haudenosaunee ways of knowing and being are connected to this land and embedded in the languages. Indigenous knowledge is crucial in managing the effects of climate change, building resilience, and shaping sustainable food systems. Transmitting Indigenous knowledge is key to sustainable water and food futures, and co-creating knowledge to build capacity for the next generation. But there also are challenges to this work. In particular, IK and tech do not always align with Western knowledge, processes, and institutions, which I think community members and um, Indigenous researchers know full well. And I think this shows up in a few different ways. I think there's often a big burden in terms of teaching others along the way, sometimes those who maybe should already know. And so this can have add, I think, time to the process and yeah, make it that, when we engage in relationships, um, this can be there can be a lot involved in that. I think the other part that in how this shows up is the lack of funding or a lack of sustainable funding. And part of this is because of how funding models are constructed, is particularly within universities and even the Tri-Council. And I know that there's ongoing efforts to try and shift this for Indigenous communities. Um, and so the other piece I wanted to highlight is sometimes it takes longer to do things right, but it is so worth it. And I think it's hard sometimes to help um, Western processes and institutions understand that because the systems that they're operating in um, have certain expectations and expectations in particular for outputs. And so sticking to doing things right is really, really important. Um, in terms of time, Kendall, do I have time to share? I can share a little bit about the work in Sandy Lake, or if that's, yeah, I wasn't sure how long you wanted me to speak for.
Yeah, we can go until 3:30.
Okay.
Sometimes they go anywhere from like an hour and a half to 2 hours. So you have time if you want it.
Hi.
Hey.
Sorry about that. Our internet just went out. Our whole power just went out.
Oh my gosh.
I think it should be okay for the moment. I've got my personal hotspot from my phone going. I
Okay.
think is my audio smooth?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. I might just keep my video off just in case, but
Yeah.
yeah, sorry
that
about
works.
that.
No problem.
Oh, saying I had to send a request for the
Oops.
share.
Okay. Let me redo this.
Yeah, I approved it. I don't know if it went through.
Yeah, I think it did. Okay. Oh, it looks like my presentation got closed. Let's see.
And we were laughing, me and Stacy were laughing. We were like, was it me? I was like, Stacy's recording and I'm hosting.
Oh no. Oh, I'm so sorry. That like
That's
never
okay.
happens. Uh-huh. Okay. Let me pick up here from okay, so in addition to the work that I have had the privilege of doing with Dawn and others with Oneganos, I also work closely with Sandy Lake and Anishinaabe Nation, um, which is located in northern Ontario. You can see on the map. Um, and I guess just a little bit more context for you. Sandy Lake, a couple of, I think, points that are relevant to some of the points that I'll highlight here is that Sandy Lake is predominantly a fly-in only community. Accessible from Winnipeg, Sioux Lookout, and Thunder Bay, um, and flights to with Red Lake and Pickle Lake. Um, and I think another piece in terms of water is that Sandy has been a community with a long-standing boil advisory, although technically this was lifted in the last couple of years. But I think, as was clear in the work with Onegano's, that even without a boil advisory, the impacts of water security certainly extend so much beyond that. Anyway, so just I think a couple points that are helpful. These are some pictures that I thought I'd share that encapsulate some of the work that we do. You can see some key people in these photos. The one being Mary Mamakizik, who you can see um, in the bottom right picture, cooking. Mary has been part of what has been called the Diabetes and Health Research Project for many, many years. Pretty much not from the beginning, but not far off from the beginning, which started back in the 90s. Um, and then another really important person is Gary, who you can see in the top right photo. Um, and the other person I want to mention is Loretta Fiddler, who's in the bottom left picture. And she has had such an instrumental role in some of the work that I'm going to speak to today. So, the Sandy Lake Health and Diabetes Project started back in, I guess, 91. And I think probably unlike a lot of the work that was happening at the time, this project was in response to chief and council seeking support from one of the actually local physicians to kind of help, particularly with type 2 diabetes. And so from there, there were lots of initiatives and projects that started to happen, and many things that have happened since then. So, for example, there's been community survey and radio show that happened over many years. Work with the schools. There was construction of a walking trail that they felt was valuable to support people getting out, and a lot of other community programming that in recent years has been funded through the diabetes initiative. So my PhD work was in partnership with Sandy Lake and was in response to a few community priorities. So at the time, as you could see, diabetes work had been happening for many, many years. And at this juncture, probably around 2015, um, Chief and Council really advised that they wanted to see a focus on kids and youth, and really wanted to kind of be thinking of future generations. And so within that, they wanted to hear more about infant feeding and what mom's experiences were in terms of that. Um, and then also, there's a focus on child growth. There was a recent survey that was done as part of that, that identified that about 70% of moms initiate breastfeeding. Um, and in addition to that, we really wanted to hear from um, moms in interviews. And so we were part of a cooking class and individual interviews. Loretta um, was part of that with me and helped with translation when people wanted to speak in their language. Um, and so we did 26 interviews with 32 moms and caregivers. So some people wanted to do this either with their partner or a friend. Um, and so that's why you see kind of an uneven number there. I just picked a couple of quotes that I thought I'd share from this work. One, um, one from a mom, she says, when you're in the hospital, like right after you have the baby, they talk to you about breastfeeding and how to do it. And when you get back to Sandy, the nurse is always so busy sometimes. So this really spoke to, and we heard from a few people, some of the challenges with um, how nurses are really pulled to acute care. And I think this is experience for many communities where um, there's a lot of um, priority health challenges, and um, something like breastfeeding support wasn't something that nurses and other resources already always had time for. The other piece to that was really leaning into services with doulas in the community. So the NISHDM Center, which is the Early Childhood Center, um, provides some support with that. So helping moms to be more aware of that and creating more support in that context. Another mom shared, I don't know, just talk to people more about it. It's natural. They don't have to hide or be ashamed about it. I think they need more teachings about that, about breastfeeding and stuff too. Um, and so one of the things that this person was highlighting too was the importance of um, sharing initially new teachings, and having support in terms of community knowledge with this. A mom also shared that she wanted to breastfeed, but was grieving. I really wanted to breastfeed her, but I was having a rough time. And so I think, you know, um, infant feeding is very much reliant on, and this is something we know in general, but I think this really emphasizes how reliant in general infant care is on mom's mental and emotional health. Water concerns were also highlighted. So a mom shares actually having clean water, and there's lots, like it costs lots, worrying about running out, especially when you're on a low income. So this highlighting that water is being purchased because at this time the boil advisory was still in effect. And I think, you know, even with that removed, there's still a huge mistrust in water, and that has an impact on mixing formula and bathing and all sorts of infant care activities. And so in terms of analysis and reflection from this work, I worked really closely with Mary through this because a lot of this was happening during COVID. And so we had initially planned to do participatory analysis, and really wasn't feasible in the way we had initially intended. And so we worked really closely together, going back and forth. And then I think the other piece that was important to me, that I found really grounding, in terms of just like bringing um, my focus to Sandy as I listened to interviews, was beadwork. Mary had taught me to bead early on, and so it's something that really made me feel connected to her and to Sandy Lake, and became just a really important part of, yeah, the work that I was doing, despite not being able to physically always be there. And so, through lots of conversations, we focused on Wabakwani, which refers to flower, a petal flower, as the framework for the key themes. And so the collective infant feeding experiences are described with both internal, so specific to the caregiver, and external community contexts, with the baby's well-being at the center. So everyone was making decisions with baby's well-being as the focus. These experiences are described and interpreted within the values and context of the Sandy Lake Health and Diabetes Research Project. Um, and caregiver experiences are told using the story of Wabakwani. So you can see on the petals the caregiver specific pieces. So things like moms, and other caregivers, mental and emotional health, um, knowledge, culture, feeling, agency, equity, and physical challenges. So there's lots of physical challenges in terms of sore nipples and other things, as well as transitions. And then some of the broader pieces that we interpreted as more community-based contexts that were influencing decisions. These included things like land and water, material needs, mother's age, family, healthcare system, and social perceptions. And we envisioned all of these pieces as connected to what we value, and also, part of a transformative journey for us. So thinking about how our team was impacted by the work and the knowledge that was shared from it. And so there were lots of caregiver recommendations that extended beyond infant feeding within this. So some of the recommendations that people made were around the need for cultural teachings. Some talked about the need for a women's center, where women felt safe to come and talk about their needs, youth support. So there was also a focus on young moms within this, lowering costs, cultural safety, and improved housing. Infant feeding decisions are influenced by a variety of factors impacting caregiver identities and the community context. And caregivers want to see more equitable supports for both breast and bottle feeding in Sandy Lake. And so this means, too, thinking about housing and income, water and food access, and food sovereignty, as well as birthing. And so, to that point, there is still a birthing evacuation policy in place. And so most births happen outside of Sandy Lake. And there's some wonderful literature and work being done to think about returning birth to community. And I know that there's been some folks in Sandy really thinking through what that might mean for Sandy Lake. Some community priorities that came out of this work. So I mentioned some of these, but the potential for more training for healthcare providers, both in and outside of Sandy Lake, incorporating the doulas, traditional teachings, more one-on-one support. A lot of people wanted more of that, and kind of having that free from some of the judgments that are felt within some programs, building capacity versus just teaching information. There is also a focus on improving relationships between birthing hospitals and Sandy Lake. and education from nurses. And then in terms of a lot of the other pieces that got mentioned, lowering the cost of formula, water, baby supplies, thinking about access to income, transportation, daycare, dental services, improved housing, and water sources. These were all mentioned by caregivers. And then knowledge translation in terms of lots of other programming. So sex education for youth, women's center, youth center, and increased awareness of the current programs. So sometimes people weren't even aware that that there were other resources available to them. And so from that work, there really was an emphasis on youth and young adults. And one of my research colleagues, Dr. Anthony Hanley, and I meet anytime we're in the community with chief and council, just part of the protocol. And one of the asks that was made was to think about funding to support youth and young adults. And so we were able to acquire some of that through CIHR and have been working on this Winning a Gowning project, which means our future, and working really closely. Really, this work is led by the youth mental health team and Brighter Futures. And we've been working with them for a couple of years. We've also been working really closely with the school and some other people within leadership. And the goal initially was to do surveys and a photo voice project and interviews. And then as we got started and other people kind of joined in on the project, things started to shift. And then we kind of, things got paused for a bit because people had to evacuate last summer with some of the wildfires. And so the work continues, but has had lots of interruptions, but continues, as I said, to be a really big priority in Sandy Lake. And right now, the team has been working in the schools, doing presentations with the youth, and really looking to amplify youth voices and just hearing from them what's most important to them in terms of their health and well-being. And just a couple of reflections overall. So health and food systems must understand the ways in which they uphold colonization and work with communities to unsettle these systems. When connection to land and identity is embedded in health and food systems, there are better outcomes for everyone. And mainstream sustainable approaches, so going back to some of my points about, for example, sustainable food systems, need to incorporate Indigenous ecological knowledges. However, this must be done in ethical ways that ultimately benefits communities, and really having communities at the forefront of that. And so with that, I'll wrap it up. And just, yeah, thank you for inviting me to be here today.